Right. I'm going to declare this session open.
Oh, please.
Thank you to all my co-hosts for showing up and so I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Barbara Shack. I'm the coordinator of the Internet of Production Alliance. Just in one sentence, we're a global alliance of people and organizations, and we're all working towards the common goal to create an open Internet of Production. We'll speak a little bit more about that later. But I just want to give some hosting points. The chat is open for discussion. You can use the Q&A if there are some questions you don't want us to lose track of, but there will be room for a more open discussion at the end of the session. And here and there on the slides, there are Twitter handles. Do use them. It helps us find information and comments and opinions afterwards. So without further ado, this is what we're going to be speaking about today. We will be talking about the Open Nowhere standard that has been launched recently by the Internet of Production Alliance. And on that topic, we will be first looking at why on earth are we talking about mapping of manufacturing capabilities? We'll then be speaking about what went into the creation of a standard for this. We'll move on to two examples of how this is or can be of use that we hope illustrate things for you who are listening to the session. And then we'll close on what's next, both for the Open Nowhere standard, but also for Internet of Production in general, how you can get involved. And we'll all have a discussion about any of those topics at the end. I am delighted, I'm also delightful, but I'm delighted to be hosting the session with a set of wonderful people. Kat will be the first to speak from Field Ready. There is also Pierre-Alexis, wave to the camera, from MakerNet, Nishant from the Somali Responsive Innovation Lab, and Andrew, who will be joining shortly from his phone. If it all works out, and if not, I will do this part of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll tell you what we mean by an Internet of Production. At the Internet of Production Alliance, we believe that something needs to and can be done about the way production works today. We live in a production system that is inherited from the Third Industrial Revolution, where the flow of goods is massive manufacturing in one location shipped out to different locations. But the technology, both existing and emergent today, enables us to rethink that model. Most of you here know this today. And by using decentralized manufacturing that would use a global flow of data. So having designs that are designed in any location, used in another location with the manufacturing capabilities that exist locally and inspiration that come from global information. The way we work on this topic is that we are an alliance of people that are actually already doing this, and we are looking together at working on the infrastructure that would enable that. We are working on standards that enable the information around an Internet of Production to be exchanged. And today we're digging into one of these standards, which is called Open Nowhere and was launched this spring. It is a standard for the mapping of manufacturing capabilities. To illustrate that, I actually am inviting one of the organizations that is a member of the Internet of Production Alliance to explain to us why mapping matters and why this organization participated in the creation of the standard, or why it thought it was relevant for a standard to be created at all. So the next speaker is Kat Sellers from Field Ready.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. If you're joining in Quebec, then well done for getting out of bed. If you're watching later, then absolutely fair enough, it is a Saturday. So, Barbara, can I drive by clicking myself, or do I have to let you drive?
We'll try. Decide to share, new share I'm seeing.
New share.
No. Can you say I will share my screen and then see at the bottom of your Zoom video if you can share your screen?
Can you just drive for me? We'll do it that way.
Sure.
So we don't delay. All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. So I'm Kat Sellers. I'm Global Program Manager for Field Ready. I manage this program, Protecting the Front Line. Next slide, please. So I'll start with a little bit about my organization. So we are a humanitarian charity. We're based originally in the US, but we work all over the world, in Nepal, in Fiji. My program runs in Iraq, Uganda, Kenya, and Bangladesh. We work in Syria. And we are mainly funded by grants. So that's large grants from big charities like Save the Children or World Vision, and also more traditional aid funding from organizations like GIZ, USAID, and FCDO. And we're a multidisciplinary team. So we're made up of aid workers, engineers, program managers like me, finance experts, anyone that we need to make our work successful. Next slide, please. So our program is a Creating Hope in Conflict program. So that's a pot of money that's funded by the Dutch, UK, and US government. It's an innovation program with the idea of scaling up humanitarian response. And it has 3 elements to it and 3 partners. So the partners are us, Field Ready, humanitarian open street maps, and needs list. And the 3 elements are, firstly, mapping the need for PPE and infection control items amongst healthcare workers in our 4 countries, but more specifically within the conflict-affected communities in those 4 countries. So in Iraq, that's classed as the entire country. In Uganda, Bangladesh, and Kenya, we're focusing specifically on refugee, internally displaced people, and host communities. So we're doing a process of physically mapping who needs what and where they need it. The second part, and the part that's most relevant to today's work, is around the mapping of local manufacturing capabilities, and I'll speak more to that as we go along. And the third part, which is Field Ready's specialization, is around the actual making. So we have a team of engineers, and we're making PPE to reduce COVID transmission. Next slide, please. So the way that we like to work as an organization is, instead of having like a standard methodology that we just print on every country that we go to, we like to respond to a challenge. So we like to, as a team of engineers, find a solution to the challenge. So I'm going to talk a little bit today framed around how our program addresses those challenges. So the first challenge is around humanitarian supply chains. So for those of you who don't work in the humanitarian field, what will happen often? And I'll give you the example of Kakuma refugee camp in northeast Kenya. So you'll see from this map, it's a super remote part of the country. Say I work for a big NGO and I have an item that I need. I'll then need to order that into Kakuma. So perhaps I might get it from somebody who imports it into Nairobi, or I might even start by speaking to my colleague who works in logistics in Nairobi, who'll then ship that item in. It'll come all the way from China, land in Mombasa, travel overland to Nairobi, and it'll go on a UN or World Food Programme plane, make it finally to Kakuma before I can distribute it. So this is obviously a slow process. It's an expensive process. And in many ways, it neglects the wealth of skills and opportunity that we have locally. Next slide, please. So our solution to that is to make those items as close as possible to where they're needed. So these are 3 photographs that I took last week on a trip to Kakuma refugee camp. On the left, you'll see a group of women who are working with International Rescue Committee, who we were training to make some surprise soaps. So that's a soap that has a toy in the middle that encourages children's hand washing. They're also making for us WHO standard hand sanitizer and face coverings, with the idea that not only can they supply the community that they sit within, but also it can be a source of income for them. The middle photograph, and apologies, it's a terrible photograph. I'm not much of a photographer. That is a hand wash station being made by an Italian charity called Don Bosco, who have a workshop inside Kakuma refugee camp. So they work specifically with refugees in the host community, and they train them in high-level trade skills, carpentry, metalwork, stuff like that. So they made this for us, and we'll be purchasing that from them as part of our program for use inside the camp. So again, we're looking at bringing skills local and bringing money into the local economy. And this third picture is a plastic recycling center right in the middle of Kakuma refugee camp. So ladies in the area collect the rubbish that's collecting around the camp. They pile it into these colorful piles to sort it. It then gets shredded and remolded into, in this case, face shields to use to protect healthcare workers. So it's also the circular economy. So this is an example of where it works really well. Next slide, please. So I think the challenge that's most relevant to the work that we're talking about today is around a lack of awareness of local manufacturing capabilities. So often, and I'm thinking specifically now about colleagues who work in international charities and who work in aid agencies, there is in many cases a lack of awareness and a lack of confidence in local manufacturing. So All the countries that we work in have some manufacturing presence, but it really isn't the case that those organizations who are buying stuff locally have any idea where that is. So a big part of our program, next slide please. A big part of our program is an actual geospatial map of what capabilities there are, where they're needed. So this is a mock-up of what the map will eventually look like. So the idea is we have humanitarian OpenStreetMaps have a team of data collectors who will go around using the Open Nowhere standard, and this is where the Open Nowhere standard comes into its own. And they will be speaking to local makers and local manufacturers, collecting all the data, and then it will go onto a map like this, which will be searchable in future. So it helps not only this program, so if I need some PPE around the corner from where I am, I can find someone that can make it for me. But also we're recording information about equipment. So even after this program's ended, the idea is that an organization might need something welded or something injection molded. They can, at a glance, find somewhere close to where they are that can do it for them. Now, the Open Nowhere standards, which Barbara's going to talk in more detail about after my presentation, is really, really important in a program like mine, because we're looking at 4 very different, very distinct countries and contexts. And we want to collect a coherent source of data that's going to be relevant and useful across those 4 countries. And this is where the standard comes into its own. So we've used the Open Nowhere standard to create a questionnaire, a really specific questionnaire that we're then giving out to our data collectors who have no background in manufacturing. But because the standard's so comprehensive, using the standard and using our questionnaire, they're then able to go out into their communities and map using just that. Next slide, please. So the third part, the third challenge, is about procurement mechanisms. So when we're spending aid money and we're spending NGO money, we're really spending public money. So it's, of course, really natural that those organizations would want a clear and transparent tendering process. The problem is often that it's really long and complicated, and it tends to exclude these smaller organizations who aren't in many ways able to compete. Next slide, please. So we've been partnering with NeedsList. This is the NeedsList platform, which we're using as part of our program as the procurement mechanism. So really, it's like an online marketplace. And what you can see on the screen in front of you is some needs that have been posted from our program in Uganda. So what happens is a member of my team will identify organizations that have a need for PPE. They'll speak with those organizations. They'll have their due diligence done through the platform. So there'll be a whole set of questions they'll have to answer. I'll run a set of background checks, and then they join the program. And once they're on the program, they're free to post whatever they want, whatever they need. So you can see here some of the posts. On the other side, another one of my colleagues who has a specialization in manufacturing meets with local manufacturers, does the same thing, does the same checks, and they can join and they can offer to make those items, and they can be matched. So if I'm a person that makes face shields, I might see someone wants some face shields, I can click on that, I can offer to make them, bang. So the idea is that something that's really long and really time consuming can be much shorter, and the nature of it being a platform like this lends a level of transparency that we think is really important. Next slide, please. So of course, this is a grant-funded program, so we have KPIs. The plan for our program is that we said that we would reach 100,000 people in our target populations. So far, we've delivered more than 50,000 PP items. I have 500,000 items currently on order, so we're going to smash that, it's no problem. And we think that we so far reached 90,000 beneficiaries, because it's not a case of 1 PP item per person. Something like a hand washing station in a refugee camp will serve many people. So we think around 90,000 beneficiaries. Another really important part of this is around livelihood. So we work with the local communities. We are exposing manufacturers to a bigger market. We're working with refugee makers and small community-based organizations. We capacity build. If you need a sewing machine in a refugee camp, and we will help you with that sewing machine. And we also do a lot of work around improving quality. So for example, we had an organization making N95 masks in Uganda. We did some external testing. We gave them some feedback, and they've now approved their standards. So quite broadly understood, we're improving the livelihoods of a number of local organizations. And of course, we hope to reduce the transmission in our target populations. As regards the mapping, we're looking to have around 800,000 data points across our 4 countries. And we've also got an online platform and APIs that will link into it. Last slide, please. So thank you very much for listening to me. I know that was a bit whistle stop. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line. You can also find here our website and our Twitter handle. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kat. where this is really great is that, on top of everything, is that what Field Ready is doing in regards to, well, Fab City in a way, is that they've brought the idea of Fab City and the idea of Fab Labs right into crisis response. Like those manufacturers they're working with, a lot of them are also maker spaces or Fab Labs right in the middle of the crisis response. So there is a direct.
I'm actually sat in a makerspace right now. The office that you can see behind me is Field Ready's makerspace in Berlin and Iraq. So yeah, fundamentally, I can't believe I forgot that. Thank you, Barbara.
Well, then I have something to say. Thank you. I have a bit more to say, actually. So now it's my turn. So I'll tell you a bit more about this mysterious open nowhere standard that responds so perfectly to the needs of Field Ready and others in the Alliance and beyond. So we've talked a bit about this vision of decentralized manufacturing and that information exchange standards are needed for that. But to create a mapping standard, open nowhere, the question we needed to answer was, well, do we need a standard for this? My hope is that Kat's presentation so far has answered that question. But in case you need any more elements to convince you, like Field Ready's example is one of very, very many. There are uncountable amounts of mapping initiatives out there, be they run by NGOs or local collectives, be they global, be they very, very micro local. Not only are they all over the place, they all also have completely different levels of technicity. An Excel spreadsheet on somebody's computer to something very advanced with APIs automating information for at an industry level, for example. If we want more local manufacturing to happen to enable a better answer to local needs, we actually need even more of that. The question is not, do we need mapping? But for it to be more useful, it would be very relevant for all of those different initiatives to be able to be used and reused for other purposes, and for all of these different angles at the mapping of manufacturing capability to be able eventually to communicate together and to be shared. And this is where the need for a standard comes up, a common way of documenting the location of manufacturing capabilities, what one can find there, where they are, etc. So our aim is therefore to enable a standard to enable all mapping initiatives to be useful for as many as possible. So what goes into such a standard then? The first and, well, not necessarily most important, but one of the first elements is that we want to create an open standard so that it is usable at the largest extent possible. However, the data itself doesn't necessarily need to be open. What I mean by that is, and for privacy concerns or for business model concerns, it's not necessarily the data that's going to be open. However, using a standardized methodology for documenting this information, it then becomes more shareable. For example, anonymized aggregation at an international or national level. Another element that needed to go into the standard was that it shouldn't matter what level of detail is available. Do I just know where one location is, or do I know every single piece of machine? We really needed it to adapt to any level of mapping that is happening out there. It also needed to be extensible because we worked with 30 plus use cases to start with of all different levels, but we know that this is not representative of every single possible use case that could come up. So that was a very important element in building the open nowhere standard. And one thing that was very clearly highlighted was that what we were not building was a database for all the data that would be collected, or a prescription on how a database should be run or how the information should be exchanged. The idea is for all of mapping of manufacturing to be using the same codification so that databases and information exchange protocols could tap into the same kind of information. And in line with that, we were very careful to use, where applicable, existing standards. And actually, there'll be a little bit more on that in a second. The audience for all of this, we're talking of mappers, makers, who are then able to be put in relation as Kat's example illustrated, with people who would want to place orders, governments, aid agencies, and all platforms that are listing manufacturing capabilities. I'm thinking public policy around industrial chambers of commerce, for example. So just a quick slide, I won't go into complete detail, but I want to underline that the process of creating the standard was a large collaborative one. There was a research into data sets, interviews of people who either make maps or would use them, maps of manufacturing capabilities, or would use such a map. Then it was designed by a large group supported by a company called Barbel, who works on standards and specifications. And then this was iterated quite a large number of times before it was published and tested, to start with, in Uganda, Bangladesh, Kenya, Iraq, most notably thanks to the support and experimentation with Field Ready that was just described. I'm going to try to keep this super short. The Open Nowhere standard is very large. The idea being that it can then be refined in different use cases. But all of the very many elements you see on the screen right now can be summed up in 5 classes. So 5 large sections of elements that go into the standard: facilities, materials, location, equipment, and agents. I will direct you to the Open Nowhere launch webinar if you want a detailed description, a bit more detailed description about what goes into each of those. But I will dig into the kind of information that is then recorded for each of these classes. And they include a standardized classification element that has 7 components. And this is where I'll be able to illustrate that we really worked with existing standards or minimizing the creation of new standards. So we're going to classify what is in a manufacturing capability. Rather than create a new classification scheme, we created something, we use something called product ontology, which means that instead of using a new classification, we reference something that exists, in this case, the corresponding Wikipedia page. Super simple example. If I'm classifying an equipment, let's say a soldering iron, there's a Wikipedia page for that. If I'm classifying a manufacturing process, soldering, there's a Wikipedia page for that. If I'm classifying a material such as aluminum or any other metal one can solder, there's a Wikipedia page for that. And this is also even more important if we're looking at translating into different languages, that we have not recreated the definition of anything that goes into a manufacturing capability. I'm reaching the end of my self-allotted speaking time, but for further information, as in more detailed information about the standard itself, a video audio friendly version is at that first link, Open Nowhere page on our website, internetofproduction.org. And for the specifications, they are on standards repo, MakerNet Alliance, which was the name of the alliance at the time where we started working on the standard, Open Nowhere. Now that I've told you a bit about what the standard looks like and that we've understood why it's relevant, the next session, or part of the session, will illustrate, so what? As in, like, why is this relevant to makers? Why is this relevant to people who are part of Fab City? And I have 2 very different examples. The first person is Pierre-Alexis Chiavaldini. I actually don't know how to pronounce your name. Who will be telling us a little bit about what they're doing with this at MakerNet and their partners in France. Bienvenue, Pierre-Alexis. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for introducing. So the first thing maybe I would like to mention is that there is no actual connection between MakerNet and the MakerNet Alliance, and that's also why MakerNet Alliance has renamed itself to Internet of Production Alliance, which is maybe a little broader. So MakerNet in itself is a platform that connects designers who create open or not open designs, which are documented in the Open Know-how standard, which is another standard of the Internet of Production Alliance, in order for clients to buy the distributed manufacturing of these designs. And the platform links these designers and these clients to local manufacturing capabilities. And this is where Open Nowhere takes place in MakerNet, because we use open nowhere standard data in order to match the manufacturing capabilities around a client wherever they are to the needs that the designs has to be manufactured. So for instance, if we have a design that has 3D printing and CNC cutting and iron soldering, to take your example, then we are going to look for these capabilities in the open nowhere standard. And so that's what MakerNet does.
That sounds remarkably like some of what Kat was describing. Can you tell us a little bit, like my understanding is that MakerNet and I would say regional local stakeholders in France are working together to prepare for a response similar to COVID or anything that might come in the future. What does that look like and how does a standard help for that?
Yeah, so basically the main point of having these standards is that inside the infrastructure of MakerNet, we do host some data. So basically we have these databases that you were talking about that are outside of the Internet of Production Alliance's scope, but using the standards in order to classify the data. And the important point about this is that it allows other platforms to use MakerNet's data and MakerNet to use other platforms' data. So this exchangeability of data is what we think is the capital point of creating a successful distributed manufacturing ecosystem, because MakerNet in itself cannot have all the data it needs in order to orchestrate worldwide distributed manufacturing. And we think that no platform will ever have all the data, or if it does, it's probably not the right thing because it becomes a monopoly. So the really important point here is how we share data and how we complete other people's data and how other people complete our data. And this is how we basically orchestrated the manufacturing of face shields and masks in France during the pandemic more than a year ago, where we have been able to link people in France in order to manufacture more than 1 million face shields and masks using, we estimate, more than 10,000 makers in France in order to respond to the crisis. And it actually really worked. And it was also due to the fact that we were able to use standards in order to exchange information between data sources and linking the needs to the manufacturing capabilities. So that's the point of what has happened already in France. And what we are looking at now is being able to use these data points of manufacturing capabilities to maybe repurpose some industries that are existing. So we are working with another initiative in France which has used basically all available open data about existing industries. So that's a little bit different to what MakerNet usually maps, because MakerNet usually maps manufacturing capabilities of individual people and fab labs, where this other initiative, which doesn't have a name yet, is mapping existing industrial capabilities. And by doing so, they have realized that some industries during the crisis have repurposed their machinery. So for instance, there was a water bottling company which repurposed the machinery to produce hand sanitizer because they had machines that could be used also for this, and just changing the parameters allowed them to change what they were manufacturing due to the actual need of this other product. And by mapping precisely the capabilities and how some industries do shift their production lines. We can use AI to predict which, they call it manufacturing leaps, can be done. So we can have in a region a set of manufacturing capabilities, and this set of manufacturing capabilities is going to be able to be related to other sets, and we are going to be able to repurpose a whole industrial region to manufacture something entirely different based on needs due to a crisis or anything else. And this, I think, is also a good illustration of the next advancements that we can envision when we have a useful standard which allows to correctly understand, as well as for humans and for programs, understand how we can repurpose and how we can use at the best manufacturing capabilities. And so the standard is capital here.
Thanks a lot, Galaxy. I find that a brilliant illustration of what you do once you've collected data. We started a little bit late, so now we're running 5-10 minutes behind time, just so people have that in mind. But my next speaker is going to present, well, what could this look like in a completely different context? How different it is, he will explain, which is the humanitarian response in Somalia. Nishant, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, everyone. Slide, I guess. So my name is Nishant. I'm with the Response Innovation Lab, and I oversee this initiative in Somalia. And today I'm calling in from Garowe, Somalia. Slide, please. So the Response Innovation Lab, just for a bit of context, we're a global collaborative platform. Our core and founding members include Save the Children, World Vision, Oxfam, Civic, and originally George Washington University. We are not a legal entity, so we're a collaborative partnership. So in different countries, we are hosted by one of those founding members. So in Somalia, we sit under a consortium, which is led by World Vision. Slide, please. In terms of our approach, just for context, simply put, we are not an innovation incubator. We are more like a brokerage service. And so how do we do that? So first, we have something called convening, and the idea is to bring people together. So it's very hard to be innovative if you're working in a silo. So we have different methods for bringing people together and working through existing structures. The next is what we call the matchmaker, and that's our methodology for pairing challenges that we see with existing solutions. So we don't want everyone to, reinvent a water filter if there's one that's already out there, but they're not aware of it. And then lastly, support. And so that is working with those who may be implementing a certain project or a challenge to help them to implement the solution. And we even have tools around gathering evidence to make sure that that is successful. Slide, please. So a lot of our work has been focused also on localization and strengthening the local capabilities and capacities. And to do that, we have several different tools. And one of the things that we've been doing over the last few years is we've gotten involved in a lot of mapping. And so the first thing that we did was we developed kind of a directory to be able to bridge local actors, whether they're NGOs or in the private sector, with big international organizations, with the government, UN agencies, and so forth. And so we developed a platform and a directory that was very easy to navigate so people could see what else is out there. If you were a startup looking for a partner or for funding, you could do that. The next thing that we did was we developed a detailed relationship mapping because we wanted to see the linkages between, let's say, who is funding what company, what products and services are they connected to. And that was more for academic purposes. And so we did a detailed kind of network analysis to see what all those connections were. And then when we finished that, we presented all of that finding, and everyone we began to realize knew that there was neat things happening in Somalia. So we wanted to put it on a global stage. And so we partnered with Startup Link to focus specifically on startups, and we did a global ranking. And in that process in 2020, Somalia not only was included, but it debuted as the 95th most innovative country for startups. And this year it moved up to the 94th. Slide, please. And then we do a whole bunch of stuff around advocacy and research and education so that people know what's out there. So highlighting local innovations in Somalia, for example. Slide. And then again, going back to the convenes, we're trying to highlight and strengthen local initiatives that are happening. So the Mogadishu Tech Summit, for example, to all of a sudden, you know, things like UN's kind of Global Goals Jam, which is like a global event happening in 70 cities around the world. We try and help facilitate that and bring, highlight local solutions to address the sustainable development goals in a context like Somalia. Slide, please. And then our matchmaker process, this is our methodology for just researching what is out there to try and make sure that we can package it in a way so that people can adopt and implement it. Slide. So over the last year, we got into a space of really supporting local and contextualizing. And you've heard from Kat and Pierre about the importance of that in their particular context. One thing that we did was around supporting the creation of public health messages and connecting local kind of content creators with global public health experts and getting kind of a co-creation approach to know what priorities were from the government. That process for us was kind of intuitive, but what it did was it was very highly visible, and it allowed many other people, especially from a funding perspective, to realize that there was a lot of local capacity and talent available locally. And content creation was one aspect, but it led to many other things where people began to realize this is an underutilized source that we could tap into more. Slide. And so one particular example is, and Kat mentioned this a bit, is we looked at bringing a product like Surprise Soap, which is a bar of soap with a toy inside, into Somalia. And we initially, for a pilot, for a bit of funding, we brought that in from outside of the country, but there were many, many delays in terms of the supply chain. So simultaneous to that, we started looking into how can we make this locally? And that became very challenging because we didn't know where to go. When we did eventually find someone who could do it, there were numerous challenges in terms of getting the materials to the skill sets and the trainings. And so for us, this highlighted a huge gap. Slide, please. And that's when we came across what the Open Nowhere Initiative was doing in the Internet of Production Alliance. And so we had this experience of mapping in other areas, and we saw the need, not just from our perspective, but many others that we work with in Somalia. And so we've been in the process of trying to figure out how can we bring those standards and build partnerships to try and map out a couple of the major cities, major hubs, Mogadishu and Hargeisa, to be able to understand that. And there's already been interest from a few universities to partner with us in this, and also the Chamber of Commerce, who are interested in helping to support their members and connect them with opportunities. So this is something that we've just signed off on and we're looking to implement over the coming months. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nishan. I'm really happy to have been able to talk about what could that look like for somebody who hasn't participated in this at all yet. And so you were a really great example. I would like us to close on what's next, both for the Open Nowhere standard, but also what this means more globally for making and for local production. I am aware that there's only 17 minutes left and that my next speaker is not known for his capacity to stay brief. So I'm just reminding of the time that is left. Andrew, are you able to be on audio?
Hi there. I wonder if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. I want to thank all of the speakers that have spoken so far. Really fascinating. And I'll tell you what, one of the great things about the Fab event is that you can have people coming in from Iraq and Somalia and Denmark and France. And in my case, I'm calling from the UK. I'm in a car on our main M1 motorway traveling north to attend a wedding. My girlfriend is driving, so it's all nice and safe. But yeah, it's wonderful to have such an international movement, and so many groups looking at adopting this data standard as well. So including from Montreal, the Fab Lab Quebec network is also looking at using the Open Nowhere standard. So I'm really excited to hear all of this. One of the things that everyone has to know to be confident in adopting the standard is that standard has a future. And I'm delighted to be able to tell you that we have here at the Internet of Production Alliance, where I'm currently the chairman, and I'm representing Field Ready in the membership of the Alliance. We have secured 2 years worth of startup funding for the development of this and a series of other standards. We are in the process of appointing a full-time member of staff whose job it will be to support adoption of the standard. So if you are looking in your project for support to use the Open Nowhere standard, we will have someone on call, on standby, ready to help you along the way. Not just with user guides, but actually, that's going to be really important. Also sort of hands-on technical work. And at the moment, it is just a standard. I mean, as we've seen today, Field Ready has its system, Pierre Alexi and MakerNet has its system, Somalia has its system. What we're also going to be creating, instigated largely by the project that Kat has been managing, is a data standard a data system that you can use. So rather than having to use your own data system and make that compatible with Open Nowhere, the adoption support will include, us providing you with a data system that you can then upload your data to, so that you don't have to run your own system. That will be connected through some APIs and so on. So we're looking to do this with fablabs.io. So to be able to connect all of the data that's in fablabs.io into the Open Nowhere data system that's been developed with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team and Field Ready by the end of the year. So all of the data that is in fablabs.io will also be part of Internet of Production Alliance Open Nowhere system. So using APIs to connect with that system, perhaps with manufacturers associations around the world, and their databases, and other platforms, Hackaday, and initiatives like MakeWorks and so on. So that's really exciting to be able to share that data and to be able to actually then have a map, a global map, that allows you to find machines near you. We talk about manufacturing capabilities a lot. The Open Nowhere standard is essentially about finding a machine on a map. So where's your nearest soldering iron? Where's your nearest sewing machine? Where's your nearest laser cutter? And manufacturing facilities like makerspaces and fab labs as well. So we will also be continuing to fundraise for primary data collection. And if you need help with that, if you, as Nishant has described in Somalia, if you are out there in Canada or in Australia, or if you're in a particular sector, industry with a membership and so on, if you want to do some primary data collection, we have some experience and expertise to help with that. So, oh, sorry, I've missed a point, which is translation. And that's basically, we're looking at translating the standard as it is into more and more languages. I have to say, I've got a particular interest in making sure that it's translated into Asian languages and Chinese in particular, because of the huge manufacturing capabilities that exist in Asia. So that it becomes a truly global standard. And then, one of the things that we're going to be able to do is tie that together with the other data standards and the other tools that we've been hearing about over the course of the Fab 16 conference, so that if you take a design that's been documented on a platform using the Open Nowhere standard, you can will be able to automatically tell, you could make this product near you with these local manufacturers. And then in the future, with standards around materials and people and skills and business models, we'd be able to create an open system. So I think that's enough for me, Barbara. You're absolutely right. I could talk about this for a very long time, but I'm going to hand back to you. That's a little bit of what's next, and I'm really hopeful that this is going to be the standard that isn't just resourced for the next 2 years, but for the next 25 years until the next industrial revolution comes along.
Thanks, Andrew. I will close this. There's a very complicated illustration on the screen right now. What I just want to leave you with is the notion that this is a standard that ties, as Andrew was just saying, that ties with several other that we are going to be working on over the next 2 years. So if some of these words resonate with you, do get in touch with us. The questions about how we standardize the way we identify the materials, the way we make contracts and business models around local manufacturing. And so those will be also things that we will be able to discuss, work on, and present at the future Fab conferences. I would like, we have 10, 15 minutes for some elements of discussion. If anybody has any questions, please do ask them. And I will skip to the next slide just so that it's there as soon as the discussion is open. But on this slide, you're able to know how you can get involved, including where you can sign up for a newsletter, the kinds of things we'll be working on. But I'm opening up the conversation right now to leave as much room as possible for it. Does anybody have a first question or comment?
I think one thing I was going to ask Barbara if you could say a little bit about some of the other work that's being done with the recruitment right now for the Alliance, and to get a sense of who the team will be at the Internet of Production Alliance. But yeah, perhaps that's a more general point rather than nowhere specific.
Yeah,
If there are more specific
happy
questions.
to address that. I think
Yeah.
Jeffrey has a question, if you can maybe give his question as well.
Not so much a question, just
Or remark.
some comments. I've been on and off meetings for this conference because I've been busy starting my own engineering center Fab Lab in Malawi, in central Malawi. And I had a meeting this morning. There's an area in Lilongwe in the capital that's referred to as the Biwi Triangle, and it covers quite a few square blocks in the city, and it's filled with warrens of auto mechanics and welders and woodworkers and basically independent makers, if you will, and the discussion, one of the discussions with a guy who's trying to organize this, what happened was the government basically gave this part of the city for this purpose as a light industrial site, and he's trying to organize. And I had developed a mapping system very similar to the ones you were describing years ago for an organization in Western Mass that essentially matched. It was a map-based matchmaking service. Database driven. You could register your needs and register your offers, and it did some proximity matching, things like that. But I just want to comment that I think the Open Nowhere standard seems, I've just learned about it today. Of course, there's so much to know in this space. Just digesting the information in this conference is almost more than a full-time job, I should say. At any rate, I'd be very interested in staying in touch, because with this meeting this morning, this guy, he's literally acting as he's not a maker himself, although his story comes from a family where they had a auto mechanic business just in this area. So he was born into a garage, as he said. And so now he's taking on the task of trying to organize this very loose collective. But you know, in speaking with him, some of the challenges are very similar in a local way, I should say. I mean, but I think the concepts here are relevant to this issue too, where, you know, even identifying who's doing what and organizing and you know, and providing support. So and the engineering center that I'm starting, I met these people because I decided, I'm an electrical engineer and a software engineer, but it turned out I met someone who's a talented you know, German automotive engineer, and we identified, well, that one of the big problems here is training. There are very few trained mechanics, and of course finding, as I've learned, finding parts, things like this. So I started this engineering center in a from the ground up way. So we're actually fixing cars to bring in money to grow the Fab Lab part of it. And so, you know, but we're also trying to reach out to this community. And so thank you for these links and the talks, so I can see how I can fit these together to help them, help us, and, you know, really, you know, unite, you know, independent makers with a central, you know, our engineering center, which is about to open in a 600 square meter warehouse. So
Congrats. That's actually really spot on, because it enables me to answer both your question and the remark and Andrew's remark. What you're describing is exactly the kind of group that we're looking to get in touch with now. So Open Nowhere, in terms of, has been launched. And we're setting up a team now, which will include a technical coordinator and a specialist for Open Nowhere, and another one for Open Know-how. And one of the work of the Open Nowhere specialists and of that team will be to get in touch with people who want to tell us about their data. So in this case, you have a person who is right now sitting on what sounds like a goldmine of potential data in terms of mapping globally manufacturing capability, and each local node will come from initiatives like the ones you're describing. Of course, Field Ready or the Response Innovation Lab in Somalia are going to be targeting a wider space all at once. But if we're looking at a standard that is then used to enable this to reach a global space, it will come from initiatives like what you're describing. So we do want everyone to get involved, especially by reaching out to us. I think the email is at the bottom of the slide, if I didn't mess up. Yeah, so write to us and tell us about your data, and we will be able to support the adoption of the standard. And that means going through what the standard is and what parts of it can be used for the context that you're in. That's one of the elements. There'll be working groups to think about sector-specific uses, and in this case, maybe it's a size-specific user guide. So thanks a lot for describing that, and do get in touch. Does anybody else have either another comment or a response to what was said? We have a minute and a half left.
Yeah, I would.
Sorry. No,
Hello,
sorry.
Paul?
Sorry.
Okay, so go on.
Go ahead, Paul.
I have a question, because in terms of what you described was actually basically somehow an circular economy, the backbone of a circular economy. So you can read it in terms of democratizing things, and you can see it also with the raw materials as an ecological thing, which can be used ecologically. But my question would be, if you think all your initiatives which you presented, spreading more and more to bigger economies, like producing a mobile phone or a laptop or automobile, there would be this crash in terms of the legal standards if you use waste as the raw material basis, for example, within the housing building industry, then there would be, at least in Middle Europe, these legal standards which would say, oh, you have to meet all these legal standards with the quality, and therefore it wouldn't be able to use a 20 years old window, for example. Yeah. So is there anything which you have thought about?
Can I answer to this? So
Yeah,
I would like, yeah, I would like to answer to both Jeffrey and Paul. So first, in Jeffrey's intervention, I hear that you have a concern about skills and sourcing, and these are two things that we are currently working on as a standard level. So so please join if you have any ideas. Just to reinforce Barbara's and Andrew's saying, please join us if you can. And to Paul, we also have ongoing work about certification, not only about the skills of people manufacturing stuff, but also how to certify objects and, I mean, designs and manufacturers. I mean, by a manufacturer, I mean, once a product has been made, it has to answer to a certain set of criteria. And depending on the ontology of the product, as you said, if it's an automobile, or if it's a mobile phone, or if it's some kind of these certified products that need to be answering to some norms, then it can be introduced in the manufacturing chain that some third parties to the manufacturers are going to certify that this build has been done as per the guidelines, which are going to be included into the design. And this is how, I mean, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but this is how we see how to handle this problem. And also, in terms of circular economy, if you look at the Open Know-how standard, which describes how to manufacture a design or a product, it's also going to include submodules, which submodules are going to be able to be reused in other products, and reusing the certifications that were already passed on the first project. Does that answer to your question?
Yes, I think so.
I am being pressed by the Fab City host to say that